Morning to those joining from the UK and further west. My name is Hamad Khilji and I lead marketing for the Middle East and Africa region at McGraw Hill. Thank you for joining us for this webinar titled Foundation Programs Post-COVID, Some Challenges and Solutions. As the title suggests, this webinar is intended for anyone who teaches foundation year programs for university with a particular focus on English language learning. Just a few housekeeping points that are worth noting. This webinar should last around 60 minutes with some time dedicated towards the end for a Q&A, but you don't have to wait till the end to ask questions. Please feel free to engage with us in the chat, drop your questions, and our moderators will be happy to pick up on them and highlight them for the speakers towards the end. I've got Sehrish Shuja, who's our marketing manager for McGraw Hill, and Rachel Finney, who is our product implementation and training consultant for ELT. And you'll also hear more from Rachel towards the end. If you're having any technical issues, you can let us know in the chat or use the hand raise icon to indicate your presence. Our main speaker for today is Christopher Graham, who is a freelance English language teacher, consultant, teacher educator, and author based in the UK. He holds a degree in politics from Warwick University, a Cambridge Delta, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. In today's session, Chris will look at some of the challenges that are encountered in the delivery of foundation year or preparatory year programs, especially as we enter the post-COVID phase. It should be a very interesting discussion, so please feel free to stick around till the end, engage with us in the chat, and we hope you get some good value out of it. Thank you for joining us again, Chris, and over to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Can you unshare your screen and I can share? Fantastic. I'll just put mine into share and we'll be ready to go. Hamad, is that clear, my screen, yeah?
It is, yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, as Hamad said, good afternoon, good morning if you're in the UK or somewhere like that. We've only got a little bit of our morning left, so it's probably good afternoon almost to everybody. I'm very jealous of you people out in the Middle East because I think it's probably warm and sunny there and it's just a little bit grey in London. So I'm quite envious of missing some Middle East sun. It's a while since I travelled out there. And of course, the reason it's a while since I travelled out there is one of the themes or one of the topics today, and that is the word COVID. I suppose really we'd like to forget about COVID. We'd like to say, oh, that's finished, that's gone. We can put that in the cupboard and forget about it. But unfortunately, somebody said to me yesterday, am I an optimist or am I a pessimist about life? Well, I'm an optimist, but I'm an optimist with some anxiety. And we're all a little bit worried that COVID might come back. Unfortunately, who knows? But whether it does or not, it has had and is continuing to have an impact on the students that we're working with now, because many of these that age range of people coming into foundation programs and who are still in high school now and will be moving into foundation later in the year will have been impacted by COVID. My youngest son is 18 and he didn't do his exams at school. They were cancelled. And the other day I referred to him as Generation COVID. He wasn't very happy about being called Generation COVID. But unfortunately, those students of ours aged between 17 and 19 will probably always be known as Generation COVID, unfortunately, because it has had a huge impact on their education. And that's what really I want to explore today to some extent. I'll just move on to, before we look at the outline, I want to look at this slide, which is my favorite slide, of course, which is a little bit of background to me. I'll allow you to read that for 30 seconds. I'm sure Hamad will make the slides available later on, but that's what I've been up to. I have worked in English language teaching all my life, which feels to be quite a long time now. So that's me. And my second favorite slide is that one, which is about my colleague Rachel. And this is an interesting way to do a presentation, I hope. I'm going to be speaking to you probably for about 20 or 25 minutes like this. And then Rachel and I, towards the second part of the session, will be having a conversation about one or two of the key topics. So hopefully it will give you two dynamics, one of a kind of face-to-face and one of a conversation. So that's why you need to see about Rachel. That's her background. She has a lot of experience as well in English language teaching, particularly on the publishing and editorial side. There's the outline. And as I say, we start around the COVID word. Oddly, there are some good things that have come out of COVID. I mean, that sounds a terrible thing to say, really, because many people have died. It's been a horrible emergency. But I'm trying to be positive. There are some dividends, some positive things from COVID that have come out. And I want to explore those in the context of our lives as English teachers. I want to explore those. I then want to look at some of the challenges that COVID has presented us with, particularly in the context of foundation years or preparatory year programs. The new challenges, let's say, that we didn't have particularly before COVID. I then want to explore briefly some of the challenges that we've always had before COVID came along and made life even more complicated. And then those challenges that we've always had, I want to explore with Rachel in the conversation that we're going to have, looking at 4 or 5 key points, what I think are key points. And there will be an opportunity at the end for some reflection. So do please put any questions or queries you've got in the chat box or the Q&A box. Hamid will pick them up, and Rachel and I will try and address those in the Q&A at the end. Please don't be offended if your question doesn't get answered. As you can imagine, time is always our enemy, so we may not get a chance to get to everything, but we'll do our best to answer any questions that you do have. And I think 1 or 2 people I noticed from your profiles don't work in the foundation or preparatory year programs, guessing from the names of your institutions. That's fine. COVID has given us challenges in any sector. If you do work in a high school, there are challenges there as well. So I think there will be some things you can get out of this talk, certainly. It's not purely focused on foundation year. I think most of you probably do work in that context. There they are, Generation COVID-19, those students who you have received, who are in your foundation programs at the moment, coming towards the end of their year, and the ones who will be joining for the new program, for the 2022-23 program, have been heavily impacted by this horrible pandemic, and there's no way of avoiding it. So I want to start, first of all, as I said, with a few positives. There have been some dividends from COVID. I think in terms of study skills, COVID has given our students, given's the wrong word, has required our students to very quickly gain some skill sets that they wouldn't ordinarily have had. They might have learnt it when they got to U. They might have learnt it later in their university career, but COVID has made them do it very quickly. One of them is their ability to do online research. They have had to learn how to work alone, asynchronously on their computers to find information, to find answers to things. And that has to be positive. That is certainly an advantage. It's something we would otherwise need to teach them. So I'm hoping, I'll call them Generation COVID, though I shouldn't, will be more autonomous in terms of the way they use, particularly internet resources. They've also had to learn how to collaborate online. We've all taught on Zoom or Teams, particularly Zoom, I think. And on Zoom, we've all used the breakout rooms. Those breakout rooms are really a wonderful tool because they are pushing students to collaborate, because you're pushed into this little room, virtual room, and told, find a solution, discuss this, look at that. So it's required them to collaborate online, which is a real 21st century skill, because whatever happens with COVID, we are going to be working online more than ever, I believe. I think Zoom meetings will become very, very common in their careers in the future. So it's a very useful skill. And I think they've also learned to become less structured in their learning. When you're in an institution, automatically learning paths, learning patterns are structured. They have to be. That's how institutions work. Studying online is a different thing, isn't it? It's much less structured. So they have gathered some autonomy. They have had to take more responsibility for their learning. I've seen it through my own son, who's been in exactly, as I said, the same situation. So whether they've been working online or hybrid, they have acquired a lot of positive study skills, I think, that we would otherwise have had to teach them. So that's something positive. And I think for the workplace, I mean, eventually after 3 or 4 years, these students will be heading out into the big bad world of work. They've learnt about working from home, the challenges of that, and it's full of challenges, which we'll look at a little bit later on. And we've experienced that as teachers and educators as well, but they have done it. And I think it's fairly likely that the world of work is changing, and working from home will become much more common, apart from professions perhaps like medicine. Even that, there are a lot of doctors now work online, don't they? So I think things are changing. Irregular work patterns. I think the future of work is going to be much less structured than it is now, or has been before. They've learned that. They've also learned, I think, they've become more empathetic. I remember when COVID first started, even people I didn't know were sending emails, work emails to me. At the end they would sign it off saying, stay well, stay healthy. And I think COVID has taught us to be a little bit more concerned about other people. And that is even true of teenagers. I underline the word even. I mean, I think they have gained a degree of empathy, and that has to be a good life skill. And I think importantly, they've also become very tolerant of change. We as teachers have had to learn very quickly how to change, haven't we? I remember working with Rachel when Zoom first started, it wasn't easy. But we've done it, we've learned, we've shown we can do it. And I think the students have also become very tolerant of change, and that has to be a good work skill, because the workplace is changing fast and it's going to continue to change, I think. So there's a few positives of COVID, but now we have to come to the challenges of COVID, the less positive, the disadvantages, the challenges that COVID has given us. And most of the challenges in the educational context around COVID, of course, are a result of being required to go online, and to go online quickly. So the impact of online. I think learning patterns have changed. People like me, I mean, I've been a teacher educator for many years. I've run a lot of workshops in the Middle East, and a lot of time I've spent exploring the importance of becoming learner-centered, where the teacher is no longer at the front of the class, but where students are working in groups, collaborating, working in pairs, exchanging ideas. Spent a long time saying learner-centered is the future, and once teachers create a more learner-centered classroom, this is good. This is the way to do it. People are happy with it, and then we're on Zoom, which is very teacher-centered. The problem with online is here it is. Here's the teacher in the screen talking at you. It's a very teacher-centered approach. It's a problem. It is potentially less collaborative because you're not physically near someone. So we do have breakout rooms and these other ways of working, but there's not the degree of collaboration that you have face-to-face. So students have missed that. They've definitely missed it. Online learning is very impersonal, isn't it? If you've got a class of, say, 15 students, it's very difficult sometimes to think he's got a problem. You can't see the face sometimes clearly. You can't pick up those little clues. You know, and I know, when you're in a class, you can think, this guy's got a problem. I need to talk to him. That's what teachers do, isn't it? We say, okay, 2 minutes. Okay, don't worry. It's very hard to do that online. And therefore, it's less individualized. You as good professional teachers know that even if you have a large group of 20, 25 students, one of your goals is to be individualized as much as you can, to say, give something for everybody. It's very hard online, isn't it, to do that? Students have had missing months. They've lost part of their education, particularly the early days of going online. And I think you may well find larger differences between students, level differences than you've had in the past. I think a lot of people's English may not be as good as it would have been before because they've missed high school time. And one of the problems is some families, particularly families where English is spoken or is where they traveled or lived abroad, they will have arranged more help. Mum or dad will have said, come on, let's speak English today. Some families will have done that, others won't. So you're going to see less consistency in levels. And I think overall levels will be lower of students because they've missed a semester, 2 semesters of high school, depending on where you're working. And I suppose what will suffer most is their oral fluency. Because again, those of you, I'm sure most of you have been teaching online in the last 2 years at some point. It's easy for students to hide. Those who are shyer, who in class you could say, come on, what do you think? Come on. It's very difficult to do online. They kind of just disappeared, aren't they? And they're the ones whose oral fluency would have just gone right down. So I think there's going to be challenges around that. This is all very pessimistic stuff, isn't it? Sorry about that. Isolation. I think learning online is lonely. That sounds a bit pathetic, doesn't it? But I really think it is. It's less collegial. By collegiality, I mean that relationship, being with other people. all of us know that students have suffered because they haven't been with other students or even been with us. Psychologically, it's damaged them. Less collaboration, less idea sharing. You can do some things online, but not as you can face to face. And I think that's probably affected students' self-confidence. As again, particularly those students who are a little bit shy, who try to disappear in class, but you don't let them because you say, come on, Hamid, what do you think? Hamid, tell us what you think. You can do that in class. We all have some shy students who try to hide. They can hide online very easily. They switch off the camera, gone. It's easy for them to do. And so those with lower self-confidence, it will have got even lower, I think. And I think they'll be reluctant to experiment with English. One of the reasons I say that is that working online is actually very public. Even if you use breakout rooms, that's better. But in class, if they're working in pairs or groups, nobody can hear what I'm saying. So I'll speak, because nobody can hear me. But on Zoom, often the whole class can hear you. If the teacher uses the same mode that we're using now, breakout rooms are better. So I'll say nothing, I'll do nothing. So I think that isolation's had an impact on learners, and we're going to have to hold their hands a little bit as well. Teacher, where are you? Teachers, it's not only learners, students that disappear online, it's also teachers sometimes. And I think one of the great things about being a teacher, for me as a teacher educator, is that you are in a position to reassure and support people. You and I'm talking to Rachel now, but everyone here in the room, we can spot someone who needs help, and we can go up to them and say, can I just have a word? Or just sit next to them and say, look, okay, don't worry, it's okay, it'll be fine. Because you can sit, that's gone online. It's very, very hard. And the other thing about face-to-face is what I call teacher personalization. If you have a student that's really struggling with present perfect tense, which nobody ever understands anyway, but let's choose present perfect tense, they're struggling. For the teacher to sit down with that student and say, listen, don't worry, I remember when I learned this at school, it's horrible. I didn't get it, but you will, okay? It'll be fine. Just take a breath, relax. For you to say that to a student is one of the, I think is a wonderful moment, because that student thinks, oh, she couldn't do it either. Oh, that's okay, I'll be all right. Online, not so much. Very difficult to do. A few minutes of one-to-one with a student can create self-confidence. I've just done a workshop about some ideas about working online, and one of the things is that you build in every week a surgery, like a doctor's office, a surgery where students can visit privately and just sit with you one-to-one, because they really miss that. So we need to double up our efforts, I think, to be supportive in that sense. As everybody said, everything's public. Everything online is public. That affects learner confidence and motivation. A lot of learners, students don't want anyone to hear what they're saying. Oh, I might get it wrong. My grammar's not very good. My pronunciation, I'll say nothing. Be quiet. In class, you can stop it. You can say, come on, work with her. Tell her what you think. You can do that. In breakout rooms, you can, but you can only be in one breakout room at a time. And you leave breakout room A and go to breakout room B, and breakout room A is in all just speaking Arabic. And by the time you get through the others and back to it's a mess. In class, that doesn't happen. So I think we need to reassure them and help to build their confidence around that. And anxiety, it's a big issue. There's a lot of anxiety. So look out. And I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but I've worked with traumatized students and traumatized teachers in war zones over the years. And I know some of the things you need to look out for. Students who are very quiet and withdrawn. Students who make repetitive physical movements, rocking in their chairs all the time. Students whose concentration span is even shorter than the average teenager. The average teenager concentration span is quite short, but even shorter, and signs of aggression. These are all signs of learner anxiety, and believe me, this is a thing. Not anxiety just about learning online, but anxiety about COVID. They don't want to admit it, but a lot of teenagers are scared of COVID. Not so much of their own health, because they worry about granny and granddad, because mum and dad have said, don't go out. If you must wear your mask, because if granny gets this, she might die. And a lot have lost grandparents. So there is a lot of anxiety around that, and that's going to impact the way that they operate. And by the way, it's not only student anxiety, it's us too. You know, we have the same problems. So I talked about student empathy, students becoming more empathetic. Hopefully teachers have too, but keep an eye on each other. It's really important to talk, and it's okay to ask to talk. You know, I think all of us who've been working online and think, I haven't seen anyone for days. It's hard. And then suddenly you go back to face. It's a whole new world. I was at a face-to-face event yesterday. I've only been to 2 face-to-face events in 18 months. And I was speaking to some colleagues. This is strange. It's not strange. I'm just talking to another human being, but it felt strange. So look out for each other. I know a lot of teachers are very anxious. And I know, sadly, some terrible things have happened to teachers because of this. So keep an eye out for each other. We have a responsibility to each other as colleagues as much as anything else. So I think one way of dealing with this is a reflection process on your learner's journey. Speak to them about COVID. What did you think of online? How did you go? Oh, it was okay. I've done this with my youngest son. He hates online. Oh God, I didn't learn very much. It was horrible. The teacher wasn't very good at working on Zoom. I can imagine. What have you learned from it? And what do you need to do now we're going back to normality? But also keep in your mind, what will we do if we have to go back online again very quickly? Who knows? Hopefully that won't be the case, but I wouldn't want to promise it to anybody. So I think a reflection, an open reflection about it is a way for students to say, well, yeah, it was okay, but I was a bit lonely. I don't like being in those breakout rooms. And okay, we're not in the breakout room now. Look, we're all back together again. You don't know each other, but we're in class together. That's different, much more positive. It's a great way to start a semester. But I think having these conversations are really important. And also explaining that you as a teacher have also struggled a bit with it. There's no harm in saying that. Sorry, I'm going too fast with my slides. Before COVID, we had challenges as well. COVID has just made life more complicated. This is what Rachel and I will talk about. So I want to look at these points fairly briefly. Level variations. There's always different levels of students. Sometimes I visit institutions and say, we talk about levels, different levels, and they say, oh, well, we do placement tests, so we don't have any level variations in your classes. I say, really? Are your classes one-to-one then? I say, what do you mean? I say, the only class in the world that has no level variation is a one-to-one private lesson. Every other class, there are variations. I guarantee, I promise you that. The degree of variation, yes, but it is impossible to have a class that's completely homogeneous. It doesn't exist apart from a one-to-one. So, you know, they're very, you know, significant challenges for us. And I think the causes are the quality of education they had in school, the high school education, which is not standard in any country. Family, as I said, if mum or dad have traveled and speak English and understand the importance of English, they may well help the child more. They may have arranged private tutors, or they may say, every Saturday morning, we're going to speak English, okay? And they do. That's going to make a difference. And socioeconomic factors as well are part of that. The exposure to, for example, the internet, English medium internet, is an important factor on English. Varieties of motivations. Level is not just about level of English, it's about level of motivation. And again, it's not standard. If, as I say, the household speaks a lot of English, then the view of English and learning English is probably going to be more positive than one that doesn't. And as I say at the bottom, the views of the importance of English. A lot of people, a lot of learners who come into foundation programs don't really see the point of English. Why do we have to do this in English? Why do we have to do all this? And that's a challenge. Others will say, I can see this because becoming bilingual by the time I'm 21, 22, when I graduate, puts me in a fantastic position in the workplace. That's the dream student, isn't it? Who really gets it. But not all students are like that. So how do we manage different levels? And learning patterns, ways of learning cultures are not standard either. As I say, motivation varies significantly. Ways of learning, not all high schools are the same. How teacher-centered or how learner-centered is one particular teacher or series of teachers that the students had over the years. Self-confidence, learner autonomy. It's interesting. These are things that maybe COVID has given us a helping hand with because students have had to become a little bit more self-confident, hopefully. Digital literacy, how literate they are in terms of using technology. Again, COVID has helped us. Interestingly, one thing that I've learned from COVID is that teenagers don't know as much about technology as I thought they did. They know about TikTok, and they know about, no, not Facebook. Facebook's for old people, my son told me. They know about Instagram. They know about those platforms that I don't understand. It's not TikTok. But if I ask either of my sons for help with Zoom, I don't know, the teacher does it. So they're not necessarily as digitally literate as we think they are. It's quite restricted, I think. And another thing that is a product of a learning culture is willingness to ask questions or to ask for help. And that's very much often a product of one teacher. If there's one teacher who says, okay, I want to speak to each of you individually once a month, have a chat, see how it's going, give you a hand, that creates that culture of support. That doesn't always happen. So you've got varieties of levels of English, but you've got also varieties of different learning cultures. So that's something that we need to address and need to think about. A0 is a challenging level, and they exist. Students who come out of high school with really very limited English, and in some cases who are not able to write very much English at all. It's going to be interesting whether Generation COVID, here we go, I mustn't call it that. Generation COVID has more A0 learners than we've seen in the past. I suspect it might. I suspect that will be one of the victims of COVID. As I said before, I think standards of English of those going into foundation programs may be dropping in some cases. A0 is a challenge. It's always been a challenge. So how do we address that? Well, how do we manage A0? Relevance and motivation. We all know about motivation. They're young people, they're teenagers. They are hard to motivate sometimes. They don't necessarily see as I said, the point of English, the relevance of English to their futures, to their careers. Probably the internet helps a bit because they see so much of online content is in English, and that may, okay, I need English for this. And of course, relevance and motivation are totally connected. If a student sees the point of something, yes, I want to do this, I get this, they are more likely to want to do it. And that reflects on course materials, on publishers, on teachers, on all of us involved in this process. I mean, motivating 17, 18, 19-year-olds is not easy. It's slightly easier than motivating 15, 16-year-olds, I think. But if any of you have ever taught primary kids, it's much easier to motivate them. And even adults, it's easier to motivate as well. So it's how we deal with the challenges around motivation, of course. And also about 21st century skills. Probably many of you know about the famous 4 C's: collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity. They're more important than ever. And in a sense, there's another gift from our friend COVID. Students have been using these 21st century skills while working online. They've been collaborating and online and also doing asynchronous collaboration, collaborative tasks. They've been communicating. And I'd argue that we actually need to add a few more 21st century skills. Digital literacy, about, as I said before, the ability to use computers and the various communication platforms. Students are not, typically teenagers are not quite as digitally literate as they think they are. That is my experience. So I'd argue that's a 21st century skill. Information literacy, not about using the technology, but about using what you find on the technology, about how, for example, how to do a Google search, a real Google search, to separate advertising, paid for search results from real results. These kinds of things are really very, very important in the 21st century. I think intercultural skills, intercultural communication are tremendously important as well. And I also think eco-literacy, Rachel, this is one of my passions is about English language teaching in the environment, but about how students talk about the environmental crisis. Don't underestimate the impact of the environment on young people's thinking. The generation Greta Thunberg, which is the age that you're teaching, are very, very environmentally aware. So how they express that, how they manage that. So how do these 21st century skills and perhaps these new sub-skills fit in? Certainly, I think it's something we need to think about. And beyond the foundation year, well, of course, the foundation year is not the end of it, is it? You give them a decent preparation. They go into the undergraduate programs. But what are the considerations for ongoing English language support as they move their way through the undergraduate programs, through the 3 or 4 year, or even 6 years if they're doing medicine, but through those programs? Of course, the amounts of support they need, through across their undergraduate career is a product probably of the level they had when they joined you in the first place, and their motivation, all the things we've spoken about. But equally, I think it's all students need some support. It partly is also a product of what their academic discipline is, how much English they need for that particular subject as well. But it doesn't stop with the foundation yet. So those are some of the considerations I think we've already had. There are other challenges in foundation programs, of course, many that you know of. So what's going to happen now? Rachel and I are going to talk about some of those considerations, and hopefully it'll also generate some questions or comments from you. So feel free to put any, I see there's some things in chat, but any you want to put in chat or Q&A, please do so. And Hamad will then summarize them and let Rachel and I try and answer them. So let's talk about this first one. Level variation. Rachel, we have this. I mean, as I said, any class in the world, you've got different levels. What can we do about it?
Okay, so Chris, thanks very much for that. That's excellent. I'm obviously McGraw Hill's English for Academic Skills course is New Interactions, and that's what I'm relating a lot of this information to because it's highly relevant. It's a course that's used for upper high school and also foundation years in institutions. And for us in New Interactions, one of the things we try to do right the way through the course is to really add a lot of scaffolding so that there's absolute clarity about instructions and about what's expected of the students, to the point where we will spell things out and we'll provide notes, we'll provide tips, we'll provide hints, just in case there are people who look at the bare instructions and don't quite get it or aren't quite able to engage with the contents. So we're providing lots and lots of support and lots of scaffolding to help to even it out. As you say, it's never going to be entirely homogenous, but to help bring those less capable students up to the level they need to be to really get the benefits out of the course.
Do you want me to show the examples, Rachel?
Tell me when you want me to. Yes, yeah, oh yeah, Chris Whitty, next slide.
That's me.
So in that rubric, the thinking and predicting rubric, you'll see that it says write at least 2 questions per section. So we're not saying to every student, write 5 questions, because for some students that simply may not be possible. So to give that level of variation just kind of gives the less able students more of a chance to engage with the activity and to be seen to be doing what they should be doing. As I said, tips throughout the books, and also New Interactions has an e-book version of the students' book. In the e-book, if students were studying autonomously, there are also hints, extra hints that aren't included in the print book, to again give that extra level of support and scaffolding so as students really can engage. And something we'll talk about probably later when we come to relevance and motivation, this thing about look at the images and listen to the conversations, a double level of stimulation, if you like, in terms of visual and audio stimulation, but also we use images a lot to just give that little step up into the topic area or the activity that students are going to do. Okay, and
as I said, when I first looked at the materials, that something that jumped out at me was that little phrase, write at least 2 questions. Because in every class, there's going to be some students who can probably write 10 questions. There's going to be some guys who are just flying ahead. For others, writing 2 questions is a real mountain to climb, isn't it? So it's not making them feel excluded. It says at least 2. I've done 2. I'm okay. Whew. They might notice that someone else has written 10, but if you physically position the classes and the groups, you can avoid that. But then that goes back to what I said before about individualization. That's to some extent the thing we've lost online, that ability to say, well, these guys, 2 questions is going to be, that's all they can do. Fine, not a problem. These fellows, they can write 10. So I think that's something we've lost a little bit. And it's nice to see that available, for you, to remind you as a teacher and for the student to see it as well. The other was one variation, as I said, we have variations of language level. We also have different learning cultures coming in from school and stuff. How do we deal with that, Rachel? Students who've very different learning cultures in the same group.
There are a number of things that we do. Some of the students are going to come in without having learned any academic skills for a start. And so that's obviously a strand of the new interactions course. So those are built up slowly, they're built up gradually, and they're included in the lessons where they're relevant, rather than just being kind of added on as an afterthought. They're really integrated into the lessons. So that kind of provides that platform for students, no matter whether they've learnt the skills before. That provides a good, clear strand of learning for them that's again supported and scaffolded. And also,
So show slide.
Yeah. Another one of the things I was going to say is something that we will come on to, but it's about the motivation and so forth, and it's about engaging students with the content, no matter what the learning culture they've come from was, so that we can kind of establish that broad-based engagement with the material. We'll see a little bit later how we do that. But this is a simple little skills focus tip, if you like, or strategy about notes. And we could assume, okay, students coming into a foundation year, of course they know how to make notes, but actually do they? Do they all know how to make notes? Is it something they've done at all? It depends who they've been taught by, where they've been taught, how much attention they've paid. So by providing these strategies, it's okay if some students don't know how to make notes, because here's a little bit about it. Here's a little bit of an explanation. It'll reiterate it and remind the students who know very well how to do this. But for the students who don't, it doesn't single them out as students who have maybe not got that skill. It just gives that little helping hand and clarifies it in case there's any uncertainty.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think it's you've probably already said this, but it's important that those who don't really know how to make notes don't feel I'm at the bottom here. These guys know. It's written very nicely, written very carefully, I think.
Yeah.
Everyone's favorite level, maybe A0. What can we do about A0, Rachel? Because we all get a certain percentage of A0 learners in our groups. What do we do?
There are a couple of things, again, in relation to new interactions. The 7th edition of this course is the newest edition that's out now. And there is specifically included for this reason a new lower level, which professes to be A1. And parts of it, I think, are just touching on that A0 level. I think on the next slide, there's something about maybe writing your name, something quite relatively easy in inverted commas. But there will again be students who actually have to remind themselves, or hopefully not learn, but they do need that opportunity to do things like this at quite a low level. And again, that's fine. It's included in the book because it's seen as, okay, let's get this in the book. Let's have a bit of revision for people who know, but let's provide this opportunity for the students who are not so well versed in these basic things, really. So as I say, that lower level is new, and it really is seeking to kind of scoop up those students who need a little bit of a hand to get up to the relevant level for foundation year starters, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the controversies around A0 is, of course, the extent to which, when they can, the teacher uses the student's native language. I mean, obviously, if you're not an Arabic speaker or not a competent Arabic speaker, that may not be appropriate. But many teachers working in the Gulf obviously are Arabic speakers. I know some institutions don't encourage, shall we say, the use of first language. Others increasingly do. What do you think about that, Rachel? I mean, for these A0 or almost A1 students?
I think that some of them are going to need native language support. And I don't think it's particularly helpful to say never use the native language at all in the teaching scenario, because it's a big leap for some of these students to get where they need to be. And so any scaffolding, for want of a better word, but any help that they can have to get them there, it's okay. I mean, obviously, I think there's a balance, and I'm not saying that all the instruction should be done through the native language, but personally, I think that's quite appropriate in certain circumstances, because you can't spend as long as you sometimes might like on supporting the A0 students. You've got a whole student group, and you need to try to establish that midline. And I think that, yes, using the native language for that purpose, as long as it's a kind of planned and it's considered, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think we need to delineate. We use first language for this, but not for that. And I think that's relatively easy for a teacher to do. I mean, I know some teachers are uncomfortable about doing it. Others are completely comfortable and do it regularly. But I think there's as much as any as a kind of psychological argument for doing it as much as a linguistic argument, because I think A0 or very low level students, even if the placement testing has been done well and most students are low level, they will hear the higher level students and they can feel very excluded. Think, oh, I'll never be like him. And I think that's a problem. And just a helping hand in the first language can, maybe sometimes if it's not done publicly, it's kind of done privately. Just a whisper of a few words in Arabic. Oh, okay, I've got it now. I think can help. I don't know. It's a controversial thing. I'm interested to hear what teachers think about it. But I mean, I think it's something we need to. It's one of the adult conversations we have to have in English language teaching about this. I mean, I at school was taught French in English, and as a result, I can't speak French. So I neither could my French teacher, I think, which is another question. But I think it's something we need to think about, particularly for these very low level students who I think we're going to encounter more. There's another thing there from the A0. This is on introductions, isn't it, Rachel? Yeah.
And it's just, again, that scaffolding, that extra support by giving functional phrases for the different scenarios. That actually is the case throughout the book. There's lots of banks of expression, functional language that you use in a particular context, just another level of support. Yeah,
I think absolutely. I think scaffolding is this is probably the word that we've mentioned most today. It is tremendously important because it gives us that flexibility to respond to these students and to these students. And of course, student level is a complex thing. People will sometimes say, he's a low level user of English. I don't quite know what that means, because he might actually be able to write quite well, but for whatever reason can't produce the spoken language. That may be as much psychological as it might be linguistic. So I think sometimes our approach to level needs to be a bit more subtle than it is to say, well, she's an amazing speaker of English, but she can't write. And that's actually very common. So it's how we play with that as well, and that's where scaffolding comes in. It's very personalized, very individual. Some people need a lot of help with writing, even though they can speak quite well. So it's a minefield, isn't it?
I think the other thing that I have to say about new interactions is because of the way the course, the whole shape of the course, there are the print books, there's the e-version of the print book, but there's also a massive range of resources on Connect, on McGraw Hill's platform Connect. Those resources are all linked in to the book and the content and the pace and the position. So there are opportunities by adding assignments from Connect that will be relevant practice for those lower learners to maybe, again, nudge them up slowly in terms of their language ability. And that also gives personalized feedback. So for the teacher, looking at the reporting from Connect on the activities that the students have done, on the assignments they've completed, the teacher or the instructor will get a profile for the class and for the individual students that indicates how successful they were in an activity, and also will flag where the need is for remedial intervention. There'll be a red flag. And I think particularly at the beginning, this sort of initial year when the intake is so varied, that's invaluable because the teacher can really keep an eye, like you were saying, you do it in class and you're more aware, but the teacher can keep an eye online because of the reporting and the analytics to identify the students that do need that bit of extra help. And it's also built in automatically to some of these online assignments. Like the adaptive learning assignment will continue to feed the student who's struggling with the concept. It will continue to feed the questions through to them and give them the opportunities to revisit grammar rules, for example. And there's tons of scaffolding in that respect as well with new interactions that really, really helps to get those lower students up a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, it's some people call it differentiation, don't they? I prefer the term individualization, but the goal is the same, is to be able to, as much as possible, teach a class of 20 individuals rather than a class of 20. And whether that's done online, face-to-face, or combinations thereof. But level is a complicated thing. It really is, isn't it? And a lot of it is very closely linked to psychology, to motivation. And sometimes you'll find out that particular student doesn't say much in Arabic either. They're just shy. It's nothing to do with language. It's to do with the fact they don't like speaking out loud, and you'll often only pick that up in the corridor or by asking one of the other teachers. So there's a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Relevance and motivation. Well, as I said, these two are certainly impact one another. I mean, what do we do, Rachel, to keep these students focused, to make them want to be sitting in our classes?
Yeah, I believe that New Interactions is pretty strong on this. The topics are really relevant to students moving in their transition from general English to English for academic purposes in an environment where, in an academic environment where they're taught through the medium of English. And in the books, the topics are really relevant in terms of campus life, in terms of meeting new people, in terms of moving away from home, for example. Right at the beginning of every lesson, there are going to be images that will be familiar to the students, relatable, things they've got something to say about, so they can immediately, more easily engage with the lesson. And there are questions, and even the questions are reflective of what, familiar things to the students, like WhatsApps and smartphone and Instagram and Snapchat, not Facebook, as you said, Chris, that's for the old ones.
Sure, people, yeah.
But that relevance, I think, is really critical in students think, okay, I know something about this. Oh, I've got something to say. And they're interested in what I've got to say. So that's good. I'm going to have a little chat with a couple of people or a classmate or a group or whatever. And they're engaging with the topic. And that obviously feeds into the motivation, because if they get a chance to have their say and they have a discussion and they're talking about things they've got some prior knowledge of, then that's all supporting the motivation and the kind of interest and the engagement with the lesson. So I would say New Interactions is really, really hot on this. It's relatable, familiar, the students are included, they have discussions, their views are considered. I don't know if you've got a slide about the blog, whether that comes up next. I can't remember what your next slide is. Oh, there you go. But that's another way where clearly we want the students' views and they're encouraged. It's not a marked thing in terms of, oh, your grammar's not very good. It's an opportunity for them to share their experiences, engage with the other students and have their say and be listened to. So I think those are critical. I mean, the scaffolding that we keep on talking about is also highly relevant to motivation, because it kind of underpins it and encourages it and supports it as they're progressing through the lessons. But this, to acknowledge to the students that, yes, we do care what your views are. Yes, they do matter. Yes, we'd like to hear them. I think those are all really important features as well.
I love what you say there, Rachel, about students, that age group wanting to be listened to. I think it's really, really important. I mean, students, the transition from school to university is a big jump. Obviously, it's a whole change in life, but not just learning culture, in life in general. Even though the majority probably still living at home, it's still a big change. And they're of an age when they want to feel empowered, they want to feel appreciated, they want us adults, though they are adults, they want us to make clear that we are listening and taking on board what they say. And the more that I've been running on working on a few projects this year with, I would say, frustrated teenagers who don't feel that adults listen. And this is great for that, isn't it? So taking on board what they say and absorbing what they say, and I think that has to be one of the biggest motivators you can get. Listening to them, basically. Oh, there's another one.
I think this is just about the fact that ready for a shared living experience. You're going to move away to a college, you're maybe living on campus, halls of residence, wherever. Again, there's lots of topics like this that are so relatable for the students that that kind of initial reluctance to engage with it, it overcomes it, because the students are, oh yeah, this applies to me actually. Oh, let's see what they've got to say. So I just think it's another relevant feature.
Yes, it's part of that big jump, isn't it, from high school to tertiary, to university. 21st century skills, the ones that we mentioned before, how do they fit in? How important are they? How do they fit in?
I was obsessed with 21st century skills for a long time in my sort of teaching and writing career. Well, I think actually I probably still am obsessed with 21st century skills. I remember somebody saying to me a few years ago, we are now educating children for jobs that don't yet exist. And I think that's just as true now, because the world is changing so fast and the 21st century is just racing along. the work landscape is changing, job profiles are changing, and I think 21st century skills are critical. I'd go as far as to say, if we don't equip our students with 21st century skills, we're doing them a disservice, because we're not preparing them to go out into the world and be able to cope, not only in education, but also in work and in life. And you can see that there's a lot of critical thinking right the way throughout new interactions. But I would say also, that even some of the academic, so-called academic skills, even to go back to note-taking, something like that, distinguishing between fact and opinion. You mentioned research as well, and how to research a topic and look things up in a sort of meaningful way. I think all those skills are relevant and come under the macro umbrella of 21st century skills, because they're all things that students will be better equipped for life with. And I think they just have to be there. They just have to be there.
I agree, Rachel, and I also agree with what you're saying about the workplace changing. I mean, things like working from home is something that, the abbreviation didn't exist until about 3 years ago, I don't think. And I think it's going to be very much the part of the lifestyle, the work style of the people who are in university now. It's going to be very common. So, and that requires creativity, it requires collaboration. So I think it is irresponsible of us not to include them, basically. I agree completely. Again, something there on critical thinking as well. And the final thing, talk about what happens beyond the foundation year, because they do their foundation year, and then hopefully they slide into the undergraduate program, and their academic career takes off, but their English probably still needs support. What can we do for that?
I would say that it does. I mean, the New Interactions has got 5 levels, and the language progression goes from CEFR A1 to CEFR C1. Now, lots of foundation years will have really intensive English, maybe 12, 15 hours a week or whatever. That's great. But in a year, or sometimes a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, I would really not think most students are going to get to C1. But I would argue that there is a place for just some English to continue, even alongside their other academic studies, so that they can still just build gradually, incrementally on their language ability at the same time, because they're most likely going to need it.
And maybe specific interventions may be needed as well for certain individuals who, like lecturers may say, she's really struggling with writing, for example, and then an intervention. I think foundation years is part of their journey, isn't it, really? Well, that was really interesting, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, look at that. Must be.
I actually could. I need one of those.
I could absolutely kill one of those at the moment. Fortunately, it's not a real one. It was when I took the picture. So that's Rachel and I have said our pieces. We're probably everyone, Hamid. I'm sorry about that. Little chance to reflect. Any discussion points, any questions that you'd like to feed to us in the 5 minutes we've got left?
Yeah, sure. I mean, no particular questions that came out, just a couple of comments. I think did relate with the idea, the struggle around not being able to turn your cameras on. I think that's a big issue, particularly keeping in mind the cultural differences. Yeah. So that was one. Roa mentioned synthesis and evaluation as the top thinking skills are important to apply, taking into consideration different cultures again. And Iram said at A0, it's even more challenging if they don't have any meta-linguistic awareness of their own language. If they don't know what a verb is in their own language, it's hard to teach them what it means in English. So those were just some of the comments that came through.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because so much of language learning does require reflection or relation to your first language. And if you don't have the terminology or the understanding of the structure of your first language, then it makes it more difficult. And I think in certain contexts that is a real challenge. As you say, if you don't know what a verb is, then it really is a long way to go back. But again, specific interventions for specific students may be needed there, I think, certainly. There's another something come in the chat. We have covered them all.
Dr. Shaju's raised his hand.
Is there a hand up?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring them in and let them ask a question.
I'll stop sharing, I think. So you want to ask one question?
Dr. Shaju, if you would like to ask your question live, you can as well, if you want. Just last couple of minutes.
It's just muted.
Or drop them in the chat.
There we are.
Hello.
There we go.
Can you hear
Hello.
me?
Yes,
We can. Yeah.
Very pleased to listen to Graham and Rachel. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I was wondering what kind of skills do we teachers need during this post-COVID period? Even today, we are not completely back to face-to-face classes. What kind of skills do we need to teach 100 students online, students sitting behind the screen? So what kind of skills that we need as teachers?
Chris?
Well, I think the biggest skill, maybe it's not a skill, well, let's call it a skill, is empathy. I think we need to get even more than ever into the head of our students and realize the struggles they're having. And that's a really big mountain to climb. But I said before, I think COVID has made us more empathetic. It has made us a little bit more understanding of other people. But that would be the single thing, and that we've only got 1 minute, would be, for me, would be empathy. I'd probably say luck with 100 learners as well, but that's not really a skill, is it?
I would just add to that, actually. I agree with empathy totally. It's more important now than ever. But I also think flexibility. I think trying to find different ways of mixing and matching with courses, using different online resources, using them in a different way, and just trying to, and also in consultation with the students can explain what works for them and what doesn't. And I think that kind of flexibility and a collaborative, consultative approach really is quite important in these slightly troubled times.
One more thing I'd add, I think, is to be realistic in your expectations for your learners as well. Progress is probably going to be slower. I mean, people are doing PhDs now as we speak about comparing progress online and face-to-face and hybrid. But I think we have to be realistic in our expectations.
All right, a very quick last minute question.
Yeah.
Came up around ghosting online in
Students appearing but not being there.
yeah, exactly.
Enter into a dialogue with them and say, are you okay? Is there a problem? Because often that is a psychological concern, an anxiety concern. I think you need to you need to open that door with the student, either yourself or to another teacher.
It comes back, Chris, as well, to when you're teaching online, there needs to be very clear, very well shared timetables for one-to-one sessions, and when instructors are available and can be contacted and so on. So students know what's around and what's available to them and when they can talk to somebody. They need to know that.
Don't forget, online, they feel very lonely and very isolated. I always, whenever I'm working, I have one now, I have a back channel. Rachel and I have WhatsApps, each phone number. So if something happens, I can send a quick message to Rachel. Particularly if a student goes offline, if they lose their connection, they panic. And you can just say, don't worry, guys, I'll get you back. I'll help you. What's the problem? What's happened? It's that kind of stuff. It's empathy again, I suppose, but techno empathy. Have I just invented a word?
You have, but it's good.
Good.
All right, we're over time now. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Chris, Rachel.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
We do hope to turn this into a series of webinars, so be on the lookout for us from emails about future communication. The recording along with the certificates will be emailed to everyone on the same email that you registered for, with. And with that, have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for joining. See you again.
Thanks, Hamad. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.